from our point of view, historically, because we are a net importer of energy, and that's always been a challenge, with the influx of refugees over decades, but most recently, a big influx of Syrian refugees that really threw off our economic prospects. When we have over 3.5 million refugees for a population of 10 million, we're the second per capita in the world. That created a lot of challenges for us to move forward. So economic prosperity helps us stabilize the country more and move forward and achieve what our young people need. From a specific point of view, obviously water is going to be a major problem. We're the second most arid country in the world, part of it because of the influx of refugees. And we have drought in the summers. This is a major concern to most Jordanian citizens. So water scarcity is going to be a challenge. There are a lot of opportunities there because we are, I think, a major hub for alternative energy, and we're looking at deals of how we can get water. But also Jordan has tremendous opportunities for agriculture, and we're working with many partners in the region for food security for them. So these are all interconnected. What I guess I'm saying is the opportunities are there, and we're actually more excited of the possibilities of overcoming these issues than the challenges themselves.
What's something that could derail this vision? Because we've seen visions in the past, and this is certainly the most ambitious.
Regional conflict. For me, the Israeli-Palestinian issue is very important. How do we, as I have always believed, the only solution to the Israeli-Palestinian issue is the two-state solution. Because if they're not talking to each other, that creates insecurities and instability in the region that will affect regional projects. The other big question is where does Iran play in the future of this? And I know that a lot of the Gulf countries are talking to Iran. And it's just, I think many of us have to identify where do we want to be in the next 4 or 5 years for our peoples. And if you give that vision, the peoples will vote. Nobody wants war, nobody wants conflict. But can we readdress a vision, not just for my country, but for the region where prosperity is the name of the game?
Does the U.S. still have a serious role to play in that conversation?
Absolutely, because I think if you look at the Israeli-Palestinian issue, you can't move forward without an American umbrella. But at the same time, there's a lot of work that we in the region need to do, Israelis and Palestinians need to do, before we bring in the Americans, which are the big guns, and it's the presidential card that always takes us across the finish line. I'm sure a lot of the visit that the president will have in Israel, in Palestine, and in Saudi Arabia, these are discussions on how do we move forward.
Yeah.
After 2 years of COVID and people not talking to each other, people want to talk to each other. To an extent, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is a bit far away from us, and that's not in our job description to be able to answer that question. Having said that, we have seen the presence of the Russians in Syria as a good thing. They have been a source of stability. Obviously, since the conflict started, there's been less of a Russian presence in Syria, and as a result, we've had more problems with Shiite militias creating problems on our borders, drug smuggling and weapons smuggling. ISIS has arisen. So again, the question is where are the Russians going to be in Syria? From the Jordanian point of view, they were essentially an essence of calm. The other part of the question is obviously this conflict, the longer it goes on, the more instability we're going to have because of commodity challenges in the region. And the more it goes on, the longer the recovery is going to be. So we are all talking to each other. Maybe that's the positive things. Because of these challenges, countries are reaching out to each other. How do we work? We just are hosting the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I was in Egypt last week, and it is a flavor that all of us are coming together saying, how can we help each other, which is, I think, very unusual for the region to get through this, because now we've got to deliver to the people.
Yeah, and it's interesting when I cover energy markets, of course, oil at over $120 a barrel, petrodollar economies are making unprecedented profits off of what's been happening right now and an energy crisis. When you think about that with regards to OPEC members, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and others, do you believe that they have a responsibility to help bring prices down particularly for a country like Jordan, who's going to suffer tremendously from these higher energy costs?
Well, again, I think these are discussions we're all having. How can we help each other out? It's dawned on everybody that we have to look at everything win-win. If I'm okay and you're not, I'm going to end up paying the price. And again, if we fall back to the regional projects where there is opportunities for all of us, if one country is suffering, that's going to affect these regional projects. So I'm hoping what you're seeing in 2022 is this new vibe, I guess, in the region to saying, how can we connect with each other and work with each other? Because although a country may have much more oil, they don't have wheat, there are other subsidies that are needed, how can we share? And so what you're going to see is these regional resilience pacts develop that break down barriers between us.
What are you hoping to hear from President Biden? Because this is an administration that many would criticize in saying they've been out of touch with the region.
There has been this narrative out there for a while that the U.S. is out of the region and other parts of the world. I've never bought into that. I believe that where the relationships between Europe and the United States were not that good recently, what the Ukrainian-Russian conflict did is bring a very strong European-American alliance back. And I believe that the message that the President, one of the messages that he brings to the region is that count on the West, count on Europe and the United States, because we are going to be actively engaged, as he will have probably the same messages for the Americas and for Africa and for Asia.
Yeah. One of the things that folks in the United States are very much focused on, obviously, is the relationship between Israel and the rest of the Middle East. And we've seen the Israelis come out with a Middle East Air Defense Alliance in the last few days. Is this something that Jordan is looking to be a part of in an effort to combat Iran?
Well, those are issues that are being discussed regionally. I think we want to look at the bigger picture. And one of the issues are based on regional projects. We want to see how inclusive we can be. And again, if I was in Iran looking at the regional projects and how a lot of this is moving towards the West, where's my part in that?
Yeah.
And so can we put political differences aside to do something right for the peoples of the region? And I think that's where we're heading more on these discussions.
Do you think we need a NATO for the Middle East?
So NATO's can be complicated if you don't understand what the charter is and what the mission statement is. I believe you can build a NATO with like-minded countries, and that's something that I've always believed in. We in Jordan have a rapid deployment force. We work actively with NATO all over the world, have been for ages. The relationship with NATO from a Jordanian perspective is actually we're partners. And I'd like to see more countries in the area come into that mix. But we've got to very clearly define what is our role. That relationship with NATO is extremely special. We are fighting shoulder to shoulder and have been for decades. And I would be one of the first people that would endorse a Middle East NATO, but the linkages to the rest of the world and how we fit in. So the mission statement has to be very, very clear. Otherwise, it confuses everybody.
Just a question on your perspective here, because you, like President Putin, have been in a leadership position for quite a while. You've had an ability to really kind of look across the breadth of history, if you will. What advice would you give to the West, to the White House, to those sitting in Europe, and how to deal with Mr. Putin?
Well, you know, I have known the president for more than 2 decades now. He's obviously very, very patriotic to his country, believes in the greatness of Russia. These are, him and his team, these are very, very smart people. At the end of the day, we had all hoped that the crisis wouldn't happen. It is what it is now. We're dealing with this issue. And the longer it goes on, nobody wins. And so how, and this is way beyond my pay grade, how do the West and the Russians find an exit to this? At the end of the day, people are dying. Whether it's Russians or Ukrainians, in probably much larger numbers than we are seeing. And if this goes on for another 6 months or a year, everybody pays the price, not just in that part of Europe, but the world. So how do we give each other respect, and how do we give each other an opportunity to find an exit? whenever there's a crisis, I think most of us, from our experiences, where's that opportunity where the olive branch can be extended in mutual respect so that we can start moving back towards the light.
Part of this economic vision is preparing younger Jordanians for a new phase in political life, a politically savvy Jordanian, essentially. You've said in the past that you would eventually like to see Jordan become a constitutional monarchy. Is that part of your strategy to get there?
We are a constitutional monarchy. It's just how do we create the atmosphere that we have traditional political parties. Political party life is something that's somewhat new to Jordan. If you remember, obviously, during the Cold War, the monarchies were with the West, the republics were mainly with the Russians. So if you were part of a political party, you were a Ba'athist and a communist, and it had a bad taste in people's mouth. And that's an issue for my generation. Younger generation Jordanians don't have that history, but still are wary of the stigma of moving to political parties. So I think this is why the voice from upstairs has to say, this is a good thing. We need the youth. The young people here are extremely smart. They know what they want. And the more we empower them, I think the quicker democracy can move in this country.
Absolutely, and part of that is a freedom of speech element.
Yeah.
At this point, it's still, I believe, a criminal offense to criticize the king. Is that something that you see evolving?
I have stepped in on many cases saying that I have thick skin and I'm a big boy. I don't have issues with people who have different views. And in this type of world, you cannot isolate yourself from other people's opinions. I think it's middle management sometimes that gets involved in these issues. And whenever that happens, unfortunately, I've had to step in and say that is not acceptable. But you have to get the regulations done in such a way where these issues don't pop up anymore.
So you believe that this is a piece of legislation that at some point will no longer be applicable?
We've been working on that legislation. And again, so it doesn't happen from us seniors.
Because you're not afraid of freedom of speech?
Not at all. The problem usually happens when somebody is indicted on something like that. It's at a lower level, and maybe there's some personal issues there, and they use lèse-majesté as an excuse. That shouldn't happen. So unfortunately, we're still in reaction mode, but once the legislations move and we move forward on the political front, with responsibility, people have to be able to express their opinions. I think the younger generation definitely understands that, and that's going to be a building stone to true democracy, I believe.